Welcome back, everybody, to A Little Less Fear podcast. Today, I would like to introduce Jeremiah Scott. Over the last 10 years, he has been working with various spiritual cultures from around the world in an attempt to discover how ancient ways of living can enhance our modern lives. He has studied extensively with European spiritual leaders and Buddhist monks to help develop his understandings of different spiritual and philosophical ideas. Since 2015, he has studied intensely with shamanic cultures in the Peruvian Amazon, becoming an expert in plant medicine and psychedelics. This knowledge has recently resulted in him being invited to participate in a study with Johns Hopkins University that will research the spiritual aspects of psilocybin use. He has recently become one of the youngest spiritualists to hold the title of ISM RAM. This title is awarded by the Institute of Spiritualist Mediums, an important charitable organization that formed in 1956. Presently, only around 25 from around the world hold this title. This is incredible, Jeremiah. Welcome to A Little Less Fear podcast.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. What a pleasure. Jeremiah, I'm interested in your journey. You have an incredible timeline here going on, and I'm really interested. I know that there's no coincidence that we're being connected today. And thank you again. And how did this start? How did your journey begin?
Well, I think for me, it probably started with a lot of resistance. I felt that when I was young, we want to fit in, don't we? So that's the typical thing when we're children, when we're teenagers, maybe into our early 20s. I think it's fascinating that age where you begin to embrace yourself is slightly different for everyone, but we might all agree that we kind of want to fit in some context when we're quite young. And so I was aware things that I thought were natural and commonplace when I was young. When I started going to school and getting a bit older, I realized that some things that I was aware of or thought may sort of cause me to be excluded from the gangs, the popular kids, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it started for me with resistance. So I would push things away. And then as my 20s developed, I found that a lot of stuff that I thought and was aware of, I couldn't really escape it anymore. And I would say that my journey really started accelerating towards my late 20s. And then I ended up going to Peru for the first time when I was 30, and it's just sort of gone on from there, really. I would say that was around my 30th year would be the big transformation.
Jeremiah, what gave you the attention to go to Peru? Why that fascination?
Oh, at the time, I wouldn't. I'd say it was fascination. So for me, you spoke at the start of this that there isn't coincidence that people cross paths when they're meant to,
right?
And that was very much what happened with my first experience of going to the jungle, and I'd been given the tickets to go out, and then one of my friends was traveling. He was doing some backpacking, and so I'd had like a works contract, and I'd had this long-term client, and they gave me some tickets that they weren't going to use to fly out to South America. They didn't really have any interest. I think they'd won the tickets, so they'd been giving them themselves. They were like, well, do you want to go? And I was like, yeah, okay. I went because I had a friend out there. And then I went to Iquitos, which is in the rainforest. And then one of the places I stayed, there was a guy who was running things, and he was from the UK, and so we got on. We had some stuff in common, and then we got talking, and I'd sort of spoken that I was aware that there was this sort of shamanistic culture in that part of the jungle, and he was like, yeah, I work with a shaman. And I was like, oh, cool. And then we got chatting, and then he took me to meet the shaman, and that's how it happened.
Jeremiah, prior to meeting the shaman, were you interested in spirituality? Did you have any type of spiritual awareness at this time?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd had a lot of spiritual awareness. So I felt like I suppressed it when I was young. I used to have quite a lot of what we might call premonition. So I knew certain things were going to happen before they happened. I was quite good at knowing who was going to do what, and all these little random bits and pieces. I was aware of presence around me sometimes, and I just I thought, oh, maybe this is a bit unusual and I shouldn't really listen to this. I'd push it away. I'd also cross paths with a what we would call a spiritualist medium. I'd been invited to go and sit with this lady and have a reading. I've only ever had a couple of readings, so I'm not one of these people who's trying to get my fortune read all the time. A lot of my big spiritual moments happened by chance. So I felt like I was now on reflection, I would say that I was pushed or guided gently into those sort of turning points.
That's awesome. So it's definitely followed you, and it's kind of also been a path that's just
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not something that I could escape.
Right. Yeah, you couldn't escape it. So here you are in the rainforest now. You're 30 years old, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You're 30 years old. You're meeting this shaman. What did you learn?
That everything I thought was true wasn't.
Such as what?
Yeah, so they work in, so the Amazon rainforest is fascinating. So around 25% of all Western medicine is derived from a plant that comes or grows in the Amazon basin. And within these plants, there is a small select group of plants which are referred to as master plants. And out of one of those, that family of plants, one is a psychedelic brew called Ayahuasca. So it's quite popular in the West now,
Yes.
especially with all of the different social medias. People are talking about it all the time. Unfortunately, it's infiltrating out of the jungle. You've got a lot of people who are trying to offer Ayahuasca ceremonies outside of the Amazon basin. And yeah, it's this word, I think really, I would say in the last 4 to 5 years, it seems to be everybody's talking about it, but it's an ancient, recipe. I think there's some evidence that the shamans were preparing it as long as 5,500 years ago, which means that's 1,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids were built. So it's a real ancient. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff when you get into it. There's a lot of people that might contest that and say, oh, you can't say whether that's true or false, but the shamans know that this knowledge has been passed down for millennia. And yeah, I went and sat with the shaman, and I didn't really have a history of what we say drug usage. I'd kind of experimented with cannabis as a teenager, like many of us do. I'd drunk alcohol in my 20s, but I hadn't taken anything else. So a lot of the other recreational drugs that people would work with or experiment with, I'd had no interest, because I was always, I don't know if control freak would be the right word, but I was very adamant that I must hold on to my focus. Like, I don't want to be out of my mind. I don't want to take a substance that makes me.
You were afraid of losing control.
Yeah, and so my life had been challenging in many respects, and I think that I put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. I must always get things right. I can't make mistakes. I've got too much to lose. I don't have people there to help me if I make big errors in my life. And so I was always very aware that I had to be alert and focused as much as I could. So I'd run some businesses in my 20s as well, when I was responsible for a lot of people who I employed. And so I kind of felt that, there was this weight on my shoulders, and I shouldn't really indulge in these substances. Now, I had read about ayahuasca for the first time in 2011, which was 4 years or so before I first worked with it. And I read about it in a newspaper in the UK. And it was a very small article, and they just simply said an 18-year-old has been found deceased in the rainforest after drinking a psychedelic brew. And it's written this word, and I couldn't even read the word at the time. I was like, what is that? What's going on here? So I went and researched it, and I found this thing, ayahuasca. Now, as I read the article, I remember thinking to myself, oh, that sounds absolutely terrifying. Why would you do something like that? But then I had this little voice in the back of my mind say, you're going to do that. And I was like, no, that's not for me. And then over the next...
That premonition nudge, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. And so over the next few years, I think Netflix was in its infancy around that time, and they used to put these documentaries on. There was a couple of documentaries they had on about ayahuasca, and I've watched those. Them. Yeah, and I found those quite terrifying. And even then, I was really mixed because I didn't like the idea of this, and psychedelics were terrifying to me. And I'd been told all of the old stuff that we had. Oh, you might have a trip and never come down, and you might trigger psychosis, and you might die, and all of these awful things. But then there was something inside me that knew that this was going to happen, and so eventually, when I found myself fortunate enough to meet this shaman, and I drank the ayahuasca, and that was it after that.
What was it? What happened? What did you
Well, it altered
experience?
so for me,
Hey, Jeremiah, I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you because there may be some listeners listening for the first time that have never heard of, I can't even pronounce it myself. Ayahuasca. How do you even pronounce it? Ayahuasca?
yeah, ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I know how to spell it, but I'm having a hard time pronouncing it. But there's going to be some people listening to this for the first time. I have no idea what this is. Could you explain a little bit what it is?
Okay, so it's a mix of plants that are derived from the Amazon rainforest, and they have two main components to the mix. And so one of them, we all have this molecule in our bodies, and it's called DMT. It's also in lots of other living things, lots of plants. The vast majority of life on this planet has some form of DMT in it, but it's very, very psychedelic in nature. There are some theories that when you pass away, you have a natural release of DMT, and it separates the consciousness from the body. So some people believe that this is how the soul leaves the physical body when you're going to be moving from one place to the next. And so what the shamans have worked out is that within our bodies we have these enzymes, so that if we have a natural release of DMT under a certain threshold, our bodies are very, very good at mopping it up and getting rid of it really, really quickly. Because obviously this would put us at an evolutionary disadvantage if we were, say, for example, coming out of the early forests, and we were hallucinating randomly, then we would be quite easy to be picked off by predators.
True.
And so we've evolved these quite effective mechanisms of suppressing this natural DMT. But what the shamans have worked out is there is a vine that is able to actually suppress that enzyme, and then there's another vine that is able to give you quite a large amount of the DMT. So you're effectively replicating those psychedelic conditions that a lot of people believe are in the moments before we pass away. So
Wow.
ayahuasca experiences I had some near-death experiences as a child, and I would say that my first experience of ayahuasca was reminiscent of those near-death experiences. It felt very similar. The way that I saw certain things and felt certain things felt like that. Those experiences that I remember from when I was very young. But this is a temporary experience, so it lasts maybe 4 or 5 hours if you're sitting with the right shaman, and then you're able to perceive your reality from a very different perspective, because it is an altered state of consciousness. So you're able to engage with other entities. A lot of people who work with the medicine will report a sense of love and euphoria, and having contact with entities that are outside of the self, and you're able to take guidance and have an exchange of information with those beings.
So I'm assuming in that case that every experience, if you were to do ayahuasca at different times in your life, you're going to have a different experience.
Well, this is what's fascinating. There is some research now into DMT, which is the active psychedelic molecule within the brew, because when you have an experience with drugs, depending on what you're taking, it depends and the setting, isn't it? So how you're feeling and where you're working or where you're consuming those substances can affect the experience. But you can also have some influence on where you grew up, your social groups, like what it is that you learn at school and what it is that you've been exposed to in the media. And so this is why we see, for example, people who drink alcohol, you'll have what's known as a happy drunk or an angry drunk, a sad drunk.
Right.
So alcohol might affect lots of people in lots of different ways. But with DMT, there seems to be some common experiences, some common things that people are reporting. The entities that people engage with, people will report them looking the same way and having the same type of feel, the same type of appearance. And so it's the only known drug where users from all around the world, all different ages, all different experiences in life, are reporting having these shared experiences, which then means there must be something more going on. A lot of skeptics might have some answers for that would be, but the more spiritual of us would gravitate towards this being some sort of outside entity connection.
So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So I understand that Earth provides us with all the medicine that we need, all the plant medicine that we need to heal ourselves.
Of
Have you
course.
found, Jeremiah, have you found that ayahuasca is specifically to heal anything specifically in anyone's lives, whether it's spiritual, mental, emotional? Is it for trauma? What is it for?
Yeah, so lots of people will go to have the experience. They will seek it out because they're feeling maybe suicidal and they're at the end of their tether. There's lots of people that feel that it's their last resort. They feel that they don't want to be here, and so it's helped a lot of people with those suicidal thoughts. It's helped to heal a lot of people with quite heavy addictions. So heroin addictions, for example, it's known to give people some relief from that. I think that it can help people with their traumas as well. It can help you to integrate things, see things from a different perspective. So what it is that you might have experienced as an individual growing up or at the hands of someone else. It can help with all sorts of things. I think there is some research into having some effects on cancer as well. It's a fascinating area. I've had some healing myself from it over the years. And so, yeah, I think that it will show you what it is that you need to see at that moment. So you asked about, would you have different experience at different points of your life? I think that the information that the entities might want to share with you would be slightly different. But from my experience, that the feeling of going to a different realm is always the same, and there is a consistency to how the experience unfolds.
So, but for the most part, when somebody consumes ayahuasca, it's in a tea form, you drink it, is that correct? Or you smoke it?
It's to be prepared in a brew typically. There are some people that are experimenting with it in different ways, but it's always, for me, it's always been like a very small shot of it.
So typically somebody will consume this in a shot or a brew or tea, and then their soul or that leaves their body at that moment. And are they like in a hypnotic state? What is the experience like?
It kind of builds up, so it takes a little while for it to build up in your system, but typically within 20 minutes to maybe 40 minutes to 50 minutes, you will have this sense of your perception changing, and then depending on the intensity of the experience, depending on what it is that you need to see as well, will dictate what happens next. And so, yeah, sometimes I've had experiences where I've had that complete separation of consciousness, where I've been able to perceive myself. I always, the first time that happened, I was like, oh, I'm dying again. So I had this recollection that I had died many times before, and I looked back at my body and I was like, oh no, it's okay, the body's still breathing. I could see that my physical body was tethered to this material space through the breath, and
Wow.
the breath is our anchor to this material place, and I was aware it's okay, my body was still tethered to this place, and so it was okay for me to relax and let the experience unfold. Other times I have gone within, and so I would learn things about myself, my life, my place within this world, and that would be deeply reflective sort of internal work.
And would one set an intention before drinking the brew? My intention
Yes.
is to see these
Yeah, yeah,
shrubs.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it'd be help me with or show me. These are typical basis for intentions, but you can ask the plants whatever it is that you feel that you need to see or have experience with at that moment. So before you drink your mix, you would sit in front of the shaman and he would ask you to set your intention, and he would give you your drink.
Is there ever a level of anxiety right now, as you were describing leaving your body and seeing yourself breathing and recollecting or understanding that this might be familiar? You've experienced this before, kind of like a death, a past death. Is there any type of anxiety that you experienced at that moment?
Absolutely. For the first time I did it, it was terrifying. I had anxiety in the days before, so I'd made this commitment that I would go and sit with the shaman. I'd visit him, and I would drink the ayahuasca. And yeah, I was like, as soon as I had sort of said, okay, I'll go for it. Let's make it happen. Yeah, I was full of anxiety, and then on the day that I was going right out into the jungle. So the shaman had some land in the forest, had a little one of those like straw roofed huts. And yeah, I remember thinking, oh, this is amazing. But I was over analyzing everything. I was like, well, now I'm like 2 hours away from the city, and I'm maybe 3 hours away from the nearest hospital, and
Wow.
I'm 14 hours away on a plane from my family, and
Oh, yeah.
so I'm
Wow.
just like, okay, I'm here, I'm alone. And so, yeah, my mind was racing. And then I remember drinking it for the first time, and I sat back and I was like, what have you done? What have you done? I'd never worked with any type of drugs or recreationally or
Sure.
medicinal, really. Yeah. So it was such a big shock to the system for me, and yeah, it was tough. And I think as well, in that very first experience that I had all those years ago, that there was that battle to hold on, to try and have control. And I'd also, over the years, and I'd read about it, and I had this idea of how the experience should unfold. And I'd spoke to other people when I was out in Peru who had worked with the medicine, and I'd asked them, oh, what happened? How did it feel? And
Mhm.
I'd made up my mind that it needed to unfold in a certain way. And the spirits at that time were there to show me that no, the way you thought it was going to work isn't.
It's not gonna. It's
And
gonna.
that was, yeah, that was an important lesson for me, to let go, to surrender to the experience, to not try to control every aspect of
Sure.
what was going to happen. And that's an important lesson in life as well, really. So I needed to learn that at that time.
Learn to let go and not try to have so much control over everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I feel that when I am trying to control everything, it's like I'm narrowing that lens of experience. I'm narrowing my own vision. And then
And you're
when
causing
I'm,
resistances when you do that.
of course, and when I'm creating resistance in my life, then how am I going to take advantage of all of the opportunities that are around me? This universe is abundant in opportunity, and I think sometimes we get stressed out and we think, oh, why can't things be easier for me, and why can't I have opportunities? And we might get into this self-critical way of looking at life, when really, when we begin to let go of control, it's a paradox. The more control we give, the more we begin to receive.
I love that. The more control you give, the more you begin. No, repeat that again.
The more you let go, the more control
The
you
more you
give
let go.
up, the
Yes, the
more
more
you
control
begin
you
to
let go, the more
receive.
you get to receive. I love that. Jeremiah, so what did you learn that first time? That I mean, obviously you continued in your spiritual journey, so there must have been some kind of awakening that you had with ayahuasca the first time you did it.
Yeah, it changed everything for me. So um, I'd had a lot of I'd had a lot of abusive experiences when I was very, very young, and the spirits come to me, and they they sort of wrapped me up, and they gave me this sense of love and happiness that I hadn't
Beautiful.
really experienced before until that point. And they sort of thanked me. They thanked me for coming, and they said to me as well. They said like all the words I suppose that you maybe want to hear at some point in your life. And they said, "Look, we know what you've endured, and we think that you've done the best you can with that experience, but they said you've managed to navigate your traumas in the best way that you can." I said, "But we need to take some energy from you now, because they said that some of the experiences that happened to me when I was very young were occurring as my consciousness was switching on in this new life." And so what that meant was that I didn't have a baseline for who I am.
Oh,
And
wow.
so what they were saying to me is that you couldn't correctly assess your energy and who you are and what your energy is, because other people had already subjected you to their energy. So you were holding the energy
Wow.
of others. And
Whoa.
so yeah, and so they said, "We need to take this from you now." And they did that in a very symbolic way. And yeah, that was amazing. And they showed me some other experiences that I'd had in different versions of life in this place, which was quite revealing. And yeah, it went on for a while. They showed me how to open myself up, how to connect my energy to nature, to the animals around me. So there was an expansion of consciousness. I was able to perceive my place in that web of life. And so yeah, I found the whole thing settled me in my life. It gave me a high degree of focus, but I also knew that nothing was ever going to be the same again.
Oh, yeah.
And so
No way.
yeah, you've sort of looked behind the veil, so
Yeah.
there's no unseeing it. Once it's been seen, it can't be unseen. And so yeah, for me, I've dedicated my life ever since then. Really, I've completely changed everything. So I've changed the way I diet, the way I live, the way I exercise. Every aspect of my life is completely different. I don't drink any alcohol anymore. I don't eat any meat, any fish. I have certain practices that I abide by each day of my life. Yeah, and so it's really just put me onto that spiritual path. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was being shown the shaman's path. And so that after a few years of going back and working with the shaman, there was a couple of teachers that I had over in Iquitos. And so, yeah, I was very fortunate that they were able to take that time and give me that generosity of to share their experience with me and to help guide me and shape me. And I kept in contact. I was able to learn whilst I was at home in the UK as well. So technology helped me to continue my lessons. So I was able to speak very much like we are now and learn and sort of, yeah, learn to be more in synchronicity with the natural environment, as opposed to trying to conquer it or shape it to be something other than it is.
That's amazing. Jeremiah, this is amazing. So I've met some friends out here in California, okay, that have done, I'm in the US, over that have done
Yeah.
ayahuasca. I don't know where they get it, but they've done it. And it makes me
Mhm.
question if they're doing it the right way. Like, shouldn't they be doing it with a spiritual leader or a spiritual advisor or another shaman or someone with experience, rather than just taking it upon themselves to try it out?
Yeah, of course. It's not a recreational drug. It's
Yeah.
not. I don't even really like to associate the word drug with it, to be honest with you. I don't know fully the system that's in place in America. I do believe there is an organization. I think there is the Church of Ayahuasca. I think that's an American organization, although I haven't had any contact with them myself. I do think that they are trying to engage with the medicine in that more spiritual way. But like I say, I can't speak on their practices because I don't know too much about it. I do have some people that I've worked with, particularly from LA, who had some bad experiences with ayahuasca that was given to them by unscrupulous people in that city. and it caused some negative effects because,
Yeah,
like you say, they weren't being guided by a shaman,
exactly.
and there's a lot of preparation. So this is the thing. I think that with the Western approach to the world, we look at things as maybe production and consumption. We produce
Right.
things, so we work to produce things with our time, even if we're just trying to produce the outcome of money. We want to get paid for our work. Or, some people have skills where they're trying to make things, but we very much about what we produce and then what we consume. So we think about things very materialistically, and I think that this creates some resistance to accept things for what they are. And so what I mean by this, when it comes to ayahuasca, for me, the ayahuasca experience could start maybe 2 months before I even am sitting in the jungle ready to consume the tea. I will begin to make certain sacrifices in my life. I'll begin to start living a very particular way, so that I can prepare my body. I'm trying to show respect to the plants. I'm trying to show respect to the values that are associated with the way that the shamans and the spiritual energy would want you to live. And so I feel that a lot of people that want to engage with ayahuasca in the West, they're very much like that production and consumption
Yeah.
attitudes. They want to have this experience on a Saturday afternoon, and then they want to feel better by Sunday afternoon, and they want
Yeah.
to return to normal life on Monday morning. And that's
Right.
really, it might be possible for some people, but I would say through personal experience that surrendering yourself to the values of the medicine will give you a far more enjoyable and rewarding experience, as opposed to trying to find someone in your local area to give it to you. I think that if you want to respect the plants, people might find the concept of flying to South America to have that journey prohibitive. They might, I can't afford to do that, or I haven't got the time to do it. But I would say if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. So for me, when I was supposed to do it, my life aligned accordingly.
Sure. Yeah, everything will align to show you that path, a clear path for
Mm,
it.
definitely.
So, I'm curious, when you're, what's the right way to say it? I almost said high, but of course it's not a drug. It's just California speaking here. But when you're under the influence of ayahuasca and you experience other beings, are they your spirit team? Are they aliens? What are these other beings that you're seeing? Is it your higher self or your or ancestors?
So that's all possible, yes. You can connect with ancestors should you feel that you need to speak with them, or there's maybe there's some unresolved energy, or there's some exchange of information that's required. So you can contact your ancestors. You can be shown if there are entities or spirits or guides that have been assigned to you to work with you. But really, my understanding of the plants are that each of the master plants will have particular spirits that are associated with them.
Wow.
So it's kind of it's with ayahuasca, a lot of people will talk to about experiencing a entity which is referred to as Mother Aya or Mother Ayahuasca, and I've had some connection with that entity, and I've also had some connection with what was known as the ancient shamans as well, and so I found that depending on what plant you're working with, because even though ayahuasca is psychedelic in nature,
Mhm.
there's another plant, for example, called Una de Gato, which translates cat's claw in the West, and I've had some experiences of the entities that would be in association, that have that knowledge that cat's claw wants to bring into this space, but it's not psychedelic. But if you begin to live your life in accordance with the values of the plants, and you begin to develop a good meditative practice, and you're living in the way that the plants are hoping that we might want to as humans, then you're able to have contact with these spirits, even if the plant itself isn't psychedelic. It's like you're inviting that energy into your being when you work with the plants. And then if you're lucky, when you're in a meditative state, then you're able to connect with that energy. So when you're training as a shaman, you'll have what they call plant diets. And so sometimes with certain master plants, you can fast and really just drink water. And then at a certain point of the day or in the evening, the shaman will give you a small dose of that one plant, and that will be all you consume whilst you're working with that plant for whatever length of time the shaman deems is right.
Speaking of fasting, as you just brought up right now, you mentioned earlier that you changed your diet. You stopped eating meat and fish
Yeah.
and changed your diet and I'm sorry, your exercise. Why did you make this change?
So it's quite controversial, really. A lot of people maybe don't want to hear it. Now, I think that food is not just, we're not just consuming food for the purpose of fueling our bodies. There is a almost tribal ritual and bonding nature of food. So if you think about people who might want to go and watch the game and have a beer and a burger afterwards, and you have like Thanksgiving was recent in the US, wasn't it? And so you'll have a big turkey and all of these trimmings, and a lot of people will come and sit with their families, and they'll all bring an item of food for the meal. And so there's this deeply bonding experience. Now, if you grew up with a father, uncle, brother, mother, sister, aunt, whatever, if you have this deep connection with an individual and you two bonded, and say, you know, you went out on a Sunday and you went and had some fun and you ate a hot dog afterwards, and so if I turn around and said to you, oh, hot dogs will give you cancer, you're going to go, I don't care, and I'm going to argue with you why hot dogs are good for me. And so this is the thing, is there is a deeply psychological aspect to the consumption of food, but the reality of it from a spiritual perspective is that when we are consuming life, we are allowing the energy of that food to join with our cells. We are building cells in our body from food that effectively come from suffering. Now, a lot of people would
Wow, I've
like to be
never heard it
clever and
said that
say,
way. We're consuming food that have been affected by suffering. So
well,
we're
yeah, I mean,
basically intaking that low vibration and vibing
yeah.
in that suffering state with it.
Yeah, I mean, look, consciousness can affect the quality of food. So we know that certain animals have to be killed in a certain way, because if they're scared, if they have too much adrenaline before they pass, this can affect the quality of the meat and spoil it. And so we
Wow.
know that experience is, their fear is having a physical effect to change the whole quality of their meat. So it isn't this alien idea. We know that your consciousness can affect what's happening to your body. But if you think that obviously plants, they're alive, but they're not conscious, they're not sentient in the way that we understand with mammals, for example. So what you have to begin to explore from a spiritual perspective is that each of those conscious sentient animals have all had an experience in this lifetime. They've all perceived their reality from a certain perspective, and they've built their entire beings on that energy. And so if you want to watch that animal you know, be killed, or you want to go and pick it up afterwards and you want to consume it, it's inevitable that you're going to take on some of that energy. You understand that you eat food for energy. Your body converts food into energy for you to be able to move around. So the
Right.
idea of food being turned into energy isn't so alien anyway. And so for me, I was shown quite clearly by the spirits that what I consumed was building the cells of my body. And I was asked, what was it that I wanted to build these cells from? Did I want to build them from something that is peaceful and has not suffered pain and misery and frustrations and sadness and anger, or did I want to allow myself to consume that energy and to build my physical being from it? And so it's very obvious very quickly that, yeah, I would find another way. And I was very much about, I used to like a steak and my chicken and all, you know, lots of different fish. To love a tuna steak, love prawns or shrimps. Yeah, but it's like it was no good for me, so I had to release that. I also found out eventually that we replace every single cell in our body. There is some discrepancies between different people. Who some people think it's around 8 years, some people think it's around 12 years, but ultimately we know that after a long enough period of time, every single cell in your body is going to replace itself.
Right.
Now, I was shown that this is inevitable. I am not going to be the same person physically in 10 years as I am today. So what did I want to do? Did I want to build the new version of me, the future version of me, from fuel that comes from non-suffering, or did I want to allow that energy into my
Wow.
being?
That's incredible.
Mhm.
You're giving me an incredible awakening right now.
Well, it's interesting as well because I've studied with more than one. I mean, we've focused quite a lot on shaman, the shamans cultures in South America, but I've studied with lots of different cultures, and I found it fascinating that many different people from all around the world throughout history, people who would never have had any contact with each other, have arrived at a lot of similar truths, and so we start to see that Buddhist cultures, yogic cultures, shamanic people will all adopt very similar philosophies towards their diet. So it's not just about me building my body from energy that comes from non-suffering. I've also started to find over the years that there are certain foods that restrict our access to what we would call higher consciousness. So there are some foods that we can trigger healing states in our body, which therefore once we're healing, we won't have that energy available for meditating into higher states of consciousness. There are certain foods that can cause our bodies to vibrate at such a high rate of speed. It's tough for us to come into alignment in meditation, and so yeah, I find that fascinating as well. Diet is something that's it's a big part of my life, and I'm always learning more even after all of these years. But yeah, the way I eat now, I think it comes to me in small incremental stages. So if you told me 10 years ago the way I would be living today and the way I would be eating and drinking, I might have said I don't want to go on this journey. So it comes when you're ready to receive it. So I stopped eating meat, but it wasn't for another year. I ate fish for another year, so it took me a while it was like each time I was given the next piece of information, it was like at the right time I was ready to make that change.
Speaking of, if you would have asked yourself in 10 years or told yourself the way you'd be eating now, that's a really good way for me to ask you the next question, Jeremiah. If you could go back to a time where you weren't spiritual, where you hadn't tried ayahuasca, where maybe you were in a dark place, knowing what you know now, where you are at today, if you could take that time machine back to that time, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I'd absolutely go for it again. I love the way that the journey has unfolded, and it hasn't always been fun. Even this year has been ups and downs. There's been lots of challenges for me. I do find that sometimes disruption in my life is an indicator that there's going to be an expansion. There's going to be some further learning. So I've learned not to resist the difficulties. I feel that I'm in the middle of one of those transitions right now. I feel that next year is going to be quite influential for me in the course of my life. But yeah, I definitely would go for it again. I think I remember years ago when I was reading about the Buddha's philosophy on why he upped and left his family all those years ago, and his philosophy was that he was suffering and his family was suffering, and he was going to try and go on this path to discover how to release himself from that suffering and connect with this concept of finding true happiness. And even though he would have added maybe to some other people's suffering with his decision, ultimately he realized that it was the only option for him, that might give him the answers that he wanted. And I feel that that's very similar to how I feel about my life and the last 10 years, last 20 years, last 30 years. I think to myself that this path might not bring me the results that I want, but living the way that I have done previously definitely wouldn't have brought me those answers.
Jeremiah, I feel your holiness. You're a very holy man walking an incredible path, and I'm really blessed to have had connected with you and the incredible listeners that are going to learn so much from your wisdom light. I'm just so very thankful. Thank you so much. You
You're
have a
very
book.
welcome.
You
Yeah, I
have a
do.
book, correct?
Yeah.
And what is the name of your book? And how can our viewers or watchers and our listeners find your book and find you if they need to get a hold of you?
So my book is called The Theory of You. It's a guide to awakening your spiritual enlightenment. And I am going through a bit of a phase of growth at the moment. I'm going to head off to India in the new year. I'm going to go and study with a Swami over there, and I'm going to try to learn the spirituality of the yogic cultures. And so you can contact me on Facebook, but I've taken the decision in the last few weeks that I wanted to create that space. So I've closed down a lot of my social medias. I put my website into sort of a
Sleep
holiday
mode.
pose, basically. Yeah. And so although you can contact me on Facebook and you'll be able to find my book online, but whilst I'm on this next phase of my journey, I'm not as accessible as I have been in recent years.
Well, I'm very blessed to have had access to you in this time right before the new year. What an incredible way to be blessed. Thanks, Jeremiah, for sharing your love, light, wisdom, energy on the Little Less Fear podcast. I look forward to following your journey and getting that incredible book of yours. Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. I appreciate it.
That's all right.
All right. Thank you.